You know, when you think of Edgar Allan Poe, what comes to mind? For well over a century and a half, his stories have just crawled under our skin and stayed there, right? Whether it's that chilling, thumping heart under the floorboards or the slow, terrifying swing of a razor-sharp pendulum, Poe is the absolute master of a horror that feels universal. It feels timeless. But why?
So, here's a really interesting puzzle for you. What if you read The Pit and the Pendulum, but you couldn't actually visualize the pit or the pendulum? You'd think the horror would just fall flat, wouldn't you? Well, it turns out Poe's genius is way deeper than just creating scary pictures. He actually built a kind of fear that bypasses the mind's eye altogether. So yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so to really get how he does this, we've got to look at his master plan. See, Poe wasn't just throwing spooky ideas at a page and hoping for the best. No, he was a meticulous architect, and he had one very, very specific goal for every single story he wrote. In his own words, his goal was to create a singular experience. Think about that. Not a collection of scary moments, not a few jumps here and there. He wanted one sustained, overwhelming feeling that grips you from the very first sentence and doesn't let go until the last. And he was obsessed with this idea. And he had a name for this theory, the unity of effect. And what's so wild is just how total this idea is. For Poe, if a word, a single word, didn't serve the one pre-planned emotion, whether that's dread or terror or whatever, it was gone. It's literally a blueprint for hijacking your emotional state, a true architecture of feeling. All right, so how did he actually build this singular experience without just relying on what we can see in our heads? Well, he used the very structure of his language like a weapon. He went after our bodies, not just our imaginations. Think about it. Most horror is visual, right? You picture the monster, you see the pendulum swinging down, and Poe does that too, for sure. But his real secret sauce is what you might call rhythmic horror. He makes you feel the breathless speed of a moment in your own chest. He's actually manipulating your physical response to the text itself. So how does he do it? Well, here's the first big trick up his sleeve. Fragmented sentences. You know the ones. They're short, they're punchy, they interrupt the flow of reading, and what they do is they mimic the quick, shallow breaths of someone who's panicking. As you're reading, your own breathing can actually start to match it. He is, quite literally, writing anxiety into the rhythm of the story. And then his second tool, it's kind of the total opposite, but it's just as powerful. Weighty pauses. The empty space on the page. That moment between paragraphs. He uses these gaps to make you wait, to make you hold your breath. And it's in that silence, that forced pause, that your mind starts racing and the suspense just becomes almost unbearable. He's creating tension not with his words, but with the absence of them. Wild, right? Okay, now this is where Poe's whole method gets put to the ultimate test. What happens when these techniques, the rhythm, the pauses, are all a reader has to go on? This brings us to a really fascinating neurological condition. It's called aphantasia. Basically, people with aphantasia don't have a mind's eye in the typical sense. When they read a description of, say, a dark and gloomy castle, they don't see a castle. They understand the concept, but no picture forms in their head. For them, purely visual horror just doesn't land. And this is what just blows my mind, because it perfectly illustrates Poe's real genius. A visual reader sees the pendulum coming down, but a reader with aphantasia, they don't need to. They still feel that rising panic because Poe has engineered it into the very pulse of his sentences. They feel the breathless speed of the writing itself. The horror isn't just in the picture, it's baked into the pulse of the language. So when you boil it all down, what we're really talking about is a legacy that's built on feeling, not just on imagery. Poe's work lasts because he figured out a way to hardwire fear directly into his sentences. It's this structural genius that makes his horror accessible to absolutely every kind of mind. All right, so let's just quickly recap Poe's blueprint for fear. It all starts with that guiding philosophy, the unity of effect, creating one single powerful emotion. He pulls it off with his rhythmic tools, like those short, fragmented sentences and those long, weighty pauses. And the result? A truly universal impact, a horror that is deeply felt, whether you can picture it or not. And all this really leaves us with one last kind of deep question to chew on. Poe's work makes you wonder, maybe the most terrifying things aren't the images we conjure in our minds, but the primal rhythms of panic and dread that he forces our own bodies to feel. So does true horror live in what we see, or is it in the inescapable rhythm of our own fear?